So it's a pleasure today to get to have a conversation and chat with a guy who has been a big influence to me. Followed his work for a long time. I was fortunate enough to get to record on a song with him back in 2020, and I'm sure we'll chat about that a little bit later. But as I was thinking about when I first heard Howard play, I had once heard that the ages of 13 to 16 are when people have their most formative years of their music listening taste. And during that period, for my 14th birthday, my mom took me to the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia to see Take Six in concert. And lo and behold, this opening act that night was all I could think about for the rest of the evening, and it was Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. All of that said, it's a pleasure to have Howard Levy.
How are you doing?
Doing great. It's great to see you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. So yeah, I went back and looked it up. It was November 1st, 1990. You guys played at the Fox Theater. That had to have been one of the first tours for you guys.
Yeah, that was in the very early days. We started touring that year. And I remember opening for Take Six. That was a thrilling experience because those guys were just so incredible. Their music would resonate in my head. It was hard to fall asleep after the shows.
Yeah, I remember it was one of those things where, and not to take anything away from them because we both know how amazing they are. But when you guys came out and played, it was like, I'm going to remember this forever. And I was just blown away with the sound of the band. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes and just kind of catch everyone up about where it started and the path for you. I think you were born in New York.
That's right. I was born in Brooklyn in 1951.
Was music present in your house when you were growing up?
Oh, very much so. My parents were big classical music lovers, and they would just play, opera broadcasts on the Saturdays and classical albums all the time. They listened to some contemporary stuff, but it was mostly classical. And my dad, who is 100 years old now, is still singing. He was a singer when he was younger, and he tried to have a career, and he had a really great voice. So growing up, they used to have these parties where people would come over and play instruments and stand around the piano, and they would sing. And I just thought everybody had that, So it was a very, very musical household. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think I've said that on just about every one of these episodes that I've done, in that I was in the same situation, and I thought that's what everyone did.
Yeah.
I thought that every family had just sat around the piano and sang together, because that's what my family did every time we had any sort of event. So I understand. Was it, when you say classical music, was it classical music across the board? Was it typically opera?
Well, they were big opera fans because my dad was a singer.
Yeah.
Opera and Broadway stuff, because you grew up in New York. Broadway, it's right there. I mean,
right.
So you want to go to see a classical concert, you go there. You want to go see a Broadway show, it's like just a few blocks away. And they had a friend who was a big time business agent for some Broadway stars, and so they would get discounted tickets for those things. But my parents used to, even before they were married, they used to go on dates to the opera, get the standing room seats. I mean, they were really into it,
Wow.
It was a very musically reinforced environment. And then I begged them. I said, I want to take piano lessons. We had this little, actually a miniature piano. It was a strange thing. It had maybe 73 keys or something. It was designed to be on a boat or something like that. And I said, I really want to take piano lessons. Oh, you're too young. You're too young. It'll be too hard. You'll quit. And the reality was that I think I was listening so closely to music that I was really ready to play when I was 5 years old. But I didn't start taking, they finally gave in and started taking piano lessons when I was 8. And as soon as that happened, it was like, very exciting for me. And I remember the first week the teacher came over to the house and showed me what the treble clef was and the names of the notes. And second week he came over and showed me what the bass clef was and the names of those notes. It's like, oh wow. And the third week he gave me some little cheesy little thing that had played with both hands. And after he left, I just started improvising. My mom came in the room and said, "What are you playing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just playing my music." I still remember this. She tells me about it because she's 97. She's still around. And so I just started improvising right away because I just think I had been listening to so much stuff so seriously that I had stored up a lot of information in my head. And as soon as I got the green light to go ahead and actually like play the piano, it just started happening. My teacher very soon said, he should really get a better teacher because I was obviously, I had a lot of talent. And so my parents enrolled me in the Manhattan School of Music prep division. I went every Saturday and learned theory, which was invaluable, and had a very good piano teacher. And whenever we would finish a piece to our teacher's satisfaction, we would play it in a recital. They had them every Saturday called Music Hour. And so I got used to playing for people. I didn't have stage fright or anything like that. I did that for 4 years from age 9 to 12.
Okay.
And it was great being in a music school around a whole bunch of other kids because, going to the public school where I was growing up, there weren't that many other kids who played music. And suddenly I'm around all sorts of kids who were like really good. Some of them played much better than I did. So it was inspiring. And I felt like, gee, I belong here around all these musicians. It was a really good feeling.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I did 2 summers at Brevard Music Center in North Carolina.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
I did 2 summers at the Chautauqua Institution, which is in upstate New York, kind of near Buffalo.
I know it well. I played there. It's beautiful.
Beautiful place.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I spent 2 summers there, and like you're saying, just being around like-minded people are so hyper-focused on practicing and improving their craft. It's inspiring to just be around people like that.
Yeah.
And did I read correctly that at one point you and your family considered you going to study with Nadia Boulanger? Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, the Manhattan School recommended that I go. I was like the one they picked of the young students, and it's like, oh, this is pretty heavy. I mean, how am I going to go? Miss all my friends that live in Paris, and my mom would have to come with me, and it just seemed totally impractical. And like, I didn't really want to do it. Who is this Nadia Boulanger? And my mom afterwards said, "Oh, I'm so sorry we didn't do that." I said, "Okay, Mom, it's all right."
No, what an opportunity to be offered. But yeah, you look
I
at
was
the
10, I
list.
was 10 years old. I mean, what
Right.
did that mean to me?
That's right.
Not much.
And so after high school, after you finished school, did you major in music in college?
No. So I went to school in New York. I went to high school in New York, and then I went to Northwestern University in Evanston, which is where I still live. I didn't finish. I only went for a year and a half. But I wasn't a music major, but I partook of the music program there. I played piano in the jazz band. They didn't really have a jazz department, but they had a jazz band, and to my great good fortune, it was led at first by the great alto sax player Bunky Green, who was an amazing musician, just incredible player and a wonderful guy. And after that, by Rufus Reed, who was one of
Wow.
the preeminent jazz bass players. And so I got to rub shoulders with those guys, and I learned a lot playing piano in big band because it's the first time I had ever seen an official jazz chart, even though I had already started playing jazz on my own just from listening and growing up in New York and going to the clubs because they let me in to the places like the Vanguard and the Gate and stuff like that. There was they knew I wasn't there to get drunk. They said, "Okay, drink a Coke and sit over there." I said, "That's all I want to do." So I heard, all the greatest musicians in the world after I got turned on to jazz. And before that, it was blues. Well, first was rock and roll, and then blues. And I started a band in high school, and we played rock and we played blues. And then all of us got into jazz, and we started playing jazz together. Then I went to Northwestern, and it continued, obviously. And that's when I started playing harmonica too, because in addition to the jazz band, I also took some music history classes, which were really interesting, stuff that I didn't know anything about. 20th century classical music, which was fascinating to me. Learning about Schoenberg and Webern and all that stuff. And I discovered the Rite of Spring. A friend of mine turned me on to that, and I went, wow, I'd never heard that. My parents their tastes weren't that modern, the Rite of Spring.
Heard from so many people that piece just kind of opened their eyes to an entirely different world, a new world, after you've experienced that piece and then everything else that Stravinsky around that. Yeah, it's incredible.
And so that overlapped into jazz for me. I'd listen to it and go, man, I'd love to blow over this stuff. I could hear Eric Dolphy soloing over these things. And of course, a lot of my favorite jazz musicians I learned later were super into Stravinsky and Bartok and Ravel and Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Coltrane. They all listened to all that stuff.
It's interesting. I'm really into Steve Reich. I love the music of Steve Reich, and the flip side of that is that he was heavily influenced by jazz players. I mean, he loved John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and it's funny how there's so much cross-pollination between both of these disciplines of music. It's really interesting. I was reading where the harmonica came into your life, and I imagine the Chicago music scene had to have been part of the catalyst for that happening.
Yeah, well, because I started listening to Chicago blues when I was growing up in New York. A friend of mine had all these albums of Junior Wells and Paul Butterfield and James Cotton and Little Walter and all those people. And I had never heard the harmonica, and I'd never really heard blues before. Growing up in New York City, it's not a blues town, especially in the 60s, very much not. It was, jazz and every other kind of music, but blues was not something that you could hear a lot of in New York City. So we went out to some shows in the Village and heard some of these guys play, James Cotton and Paul Butterfield, and I just was totally blown away by the bands and by the harmonica playing and the whole thing. And I decided I want to learn how to play this harmonica. I could carry it in my pocket. I could bend notes. Hey, can't do that on a piano. And so I bought my first harp at Manny's for $2.25. And I struggled mightily with it. I couldn't do anything until I went to Northwestern. It was my third day there during freshman orientation week. And it's kind of a long story, but I'll skip it. But I took it out of my pocket and suddenly I could bend notes. It was just something happened. Maybe being in Chicago. I actually had attended a rally for the Chicago 7. And it's when I walked out of that rally that I picked up my harmonica and was able to play the blues. I swear that's how it happened. I couldn't play it at all before that. And after that, I could, within minutes, I was playing all these blues licks because I knew what they were supposed to sound like.
If there would be a time to want to play the blues, that probably would have been that perfect moment for it to happen.
I tell you, I still don't understand. Some little switch clicked in my head.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in researching your life, but I didn't realize what a groundbreaking person you were for the instrument in this overbending technique, this overblowing technique. For those of us that are not harmonica players, could you just kind of give a little bit of a snapshot of what that technique is?
Sure. You want me to play a little bit too?
Sure. I'd love that.
Yeah. So, I'm playing these blues licks and I'm frustrated at the fact that there's notes that are missing on the harmonica. I just thought, how could this great instrument not be able to play all the notes? Being a pianist, they're the notes. They're right there. And every other instrument could play all the notes. How come this thing that I totally loved doesn't have all the notes on it? And so I figured out, I was in my freshman dorm after playing for about 3 months, maybe. I figured out, you can bend the note down from the higher pitched note to just above the lower pitched note on the hole. That's the way the bending works on the harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
So on the bottom of the harmonica, the first 6 holes, the draw notes are higher than the blows. So you can bend those draw notes down. So the first hole, you can bend D. This is a C harp, which I usually use to demonstrate for teaching. It's not my favorite key harp, but and the second hole is E and G. So you got all those pitches bending down in G. And third hole, G and B. There's 4 pitches there. So already, if you're trying to play the chromatic scale, you got most of the notes. Then D goes down to D flat on the 4th hole. But then you just have E and F and G, and then A flat and A. Because you can't bend down on the 5th hole because it's F and E. There's nothing in between.
Right.
If you bend F down, you just sort of start breaking the harmonica. So there's a bunch of missing notes there. So it made me really frustrated, especially trying to play like, the 1 chord, and then you go to the 4 chord. If you do that on any other instrument, you get shot on stage. So harmonica players, it's okay to play that note there because we can't do it. It's like, no, the only way to do it is to go to the lower octave and bend. But I was really frustrated. I wanted to play that flat third up there, the 7th of the 4 chord.
Mm-hmm.
So on the top of the harmonica, the blow notes are higher than the draw notes. There's too many. It's too hard to explain right now, but this instrument is different in every octave because the Germans designed it to play German folk music. Left out a bunch of notes in the first octave so you can get the one in the 5 chord. They put the notes in the middle and the top until they ran out of notes. It's very random. The top of the harmonica, you can bend the blow notes down. In the key of the harp. You can play some blues licks up there. So when I was frustrated by the fact that there were notes missing on the bottom and the top, I thought, if I bend in the opposite direction, let's see what happens. So one day I'm trying to bend the 6th hole blow down, and it's the lowest note already. The draw bends down, and suddenly I did it in such a way that a higher note popped up, and that was the missing B flat. I was very excited. I thought, well, maybe all the other places on the instrument where the note is missing, you can get with the same technique. And sure enough, you can. It's like magic. Now we got the 2 octaves of the chromatic scale. So it was sort of a mind blower. And then I figured out on the top of the harmonica, you can do the same with the draws. And now you get the full 3 octave scale. And that's why I like a lower key harmonica to play on, because the high end of a C is pretty high.
It's high, yeah.
So then I realized, well, maybe I can turn this into a real 12-tone instrument, So anything I could visualize on the piano, because I see it in my mind as a piano keyboard, because it's invisible.
Right.
It's the only instrument that's totally invisible to the person playing it, beside the voice. And there's no fingers involved. There's no hands except to hold the instrument and shape the sound. So I close my eyes. I'm going, what am I seeing? After a while, I realize I'm seeing the piano. And so that is what I see when I play the diatonic harmonica. I do a lot of things where I'm playing them at the same time in certain bands, like the Flecktones. I did that in Trio Globo, and my present band, the Howard Levy 4. I do quite a bit of stuff like that as well.
First of all, I'm just blown away with your ability on the instrument. It's just it's fantastic, and I hadn't thought about the fact that visually you can't see the instrument, and
right.
What type is there some muscle memory involved there as far as just knowing the position of the instrument on your mouth? Did you have to develop that as well?
The inside of your mouth is what's doing all the work, the tongue and the throat. And you just sort of memorize these positions. just like a singer, like
Right.
where you place your voice in your between your chest and your head and all that other stuff. It's a similar thing. It's like singing, really. So depending on the key of the harmonica, the lower the key of the harp, the further back in your throat the bends go, like a G harp. Almost like swallowing your tongue. You do the same thing on the first whole draw of a C harp. Oops, is that a C? Yeah. It's not nearly so far down into your throat because it has to do with the resonance of the inside of the mouth. And I didn't necessarily know all this, but I knew how it felt. And that's one of the things as a harp player, they come in all these different keys. And the usual standard thing is to play what harmonica players call positions. So if you're going to play blues, you usually play in second position, which is the key of the second whole draw of the instrument. So if you're in C, you play in G because that's the Mixolydian mode. It gives you the seventh, flat seventh. And as if by magic, all the notes that you need for blues are just magically there as bends. It's all there. Like the Germans who designed this thing in the 1820s, 30s, whatever, they had no idea that they
No.
were designing the world's greatest blues instrument. It's just a total accident. It's
Man,
amazing.
and you were talking about playing with the Flecktones and then with your current group, and I would like to ask you about that independence that is required to play both of those instruments because I do, I've done a lot of work over the years playing drums and being a singer as well. At least for me, I can't focus on one more than the other. I find that I get in a little bit of a trap if I overthink one direction or the other. What did you do to work out that independence? And what is your mindset on that while you're playing?
That's a very good question. It's sort of it happens a little differently every time. But I would say that with the Flecktones, it was just we played so much. We played 120, 130 gigs a year. So we rehearsed a lot. We recorded a bunch of albums, and so I had to do it. Necessity is a mother, as we say, and I just had to do it. And some of these tunes I was playing in all different key harmonicas and piano at the same time. So it's a B, a D flat, an A G, a C, an F. I mean, whatever was the best harp for the job, an A flat. So I had to start sometimes thinking in relative pitch on both instruments. It was a very interesting process. And I remember in the beginning when we were rehearsing, we'd run over a tune a few times and I'd go, "Hey guys, I got to stop. I've got smoke coming out of my ears. I'm trying to play these two instruments at the same time, and I just have to stop." It's too much.
One of the things I've always enjoyed about your playing too is that when you were playing with Bela, that the harmonica was a lead instrument, but you would also treat it as an accompanying instrument and playing long tones underneath maybe a banjo solo. And I hadn't really heard the instrument treated that way very much, at least in the music that I had listened to. Was that a conscious decision on your part to maybe move away from the piano and let the harmonica be some of the harmonic support underneath
Well,
those
yeah,
solos?
I just think orchestrally. When I'm in a band, I just think like, what's the best part I could play on whatever instrument I'm playing? So I play a lot of other instruments too, even though I've kind of given them up over the last 10 years or so. But I'm always thinking like, what's the best part that I can play, and to make the band sound like the most organic that it can. And whether that's on a piano or a synthesizer or harmonica or whatever it might be, I try to, find the right stuff to do when it's not a solo, you
Yeah,
know.
that's great. When did you and Bela meet each other and start playing?
Yeah, that was in 1987 at the Winnipeg Folk Festival. Bela was up there with Newgrass Revival, and I was up there with a band called Trapezoid, very interesting group who lived in West Virginia at the time. And there was an incredibly talented woman named Lorraine Dweezy who just wrote incredible music. It was just she's still at it. It's very amazing. It's sort of in the cracks between every genre you could think of. And she was saying to me, like, Howard, you and Bela have to play together, every day of the festival. Yeah, okay. And unbeknownst to me, she was also going over to Bela saying, Bela, you and Howard have to play together. So it was the last night of the festival. They had these big parties, and she dragged me. She says, Howard, dragged me down the hall. And Bela was sitting with his banjo case somewhere in the lobby and said, Howard, Bela, play. And we looked at each other and, like when a beautiful woman says that, it's like, okay, let's do it.
Let's do it.
And so we started playing and it was like, oh, this is really interesting. And a little crowd was gathering around us and we weren't into the like performing and we hadn't even met, other than hello. So I said, let's go to a quieter place. So the three of us, actually a fourth guy as well, went up to my room and we played till 7 a.m. All different kinds of stuff, just improvising. And unbeknownst to me, Bela was playing tunes that he was working on, that some of which would end up on our first album. And I was just hearing it and just playing along, whatever the time meter or key, whatever it was. And it was quite an experience. And when it was over at 7 a.m, and we're all like, exhausted, but I said, we got to do this again, man. Like, so the next year, Bela got asked to do a TV show in Louisville on a show called the Lonesome Pine Special.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who was promoting it said, yeah, everyone you play with is great. The Nashville Music Mafia, they're all amazing. But I want you to put together something unusual and different. And he thought, oh, unusual, Howard Levy, And then he met Vic and Roy. And so he called me up and said, Howard, how would you like to do a TV show with me? And I said, it would be great. And we played the show, and it was a really exhilarating experience. And the audience went nuts. And we looked at each other and said, hey, I think this is a band. You want to try this again? That's how it started.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever heard a band of 4 people that changed the direction of their respective instrument like the 4 of you in that group. I mean, it was like 4 inventors playing musical instruments with each other.
Yeah, very much so. And we all shared that kind of pioneering spirit of about music, the instruments and the music that we were playing both, and how to make it sound like an organic being, and in whatever time meter it was, and whatever the harmonies were, and everybody was just really into it. It was exciting for all of us.
Yeah. So I saw you guys in '90, and then these were the days before content being at your disposal all the time with YouTube. So anywhere I could find you, which was not an easy feat. I remember seeing it was on the Jacksonville Jazz Festival. There was a good video of that. I remember recording that. And I think I saw you guys were on an episode of Austin City Limits at one point.
Yes.
That was a good one. I think that might have been, was that supporting the second record? I'm not really sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I was the kid at my school that was walking around with Flecktones t-shirts, and everyone was like, what is that? Yeah, what is a Flecktone? So you left the band in 92.
Very end of 92. I played until like December 14th or something like that. Yeah.
And I want to ask about the next thing you did after that, but I want to talk about when you came back to the band. When did you come back and you guys did some shows?
Well, there were a few shows over the years where I would sit in or was asked to participate. But I came back in a real way I think it was the end of 2009. We did a little tour together just to see how it would feel. And it felt great. And then we recorded the Rocket Science album in 2010. And then we did a big tour in 2011 and 12.
And then that's what I was curious about, because I've had periods where I played with a band for a long time and then maybe went and did something and then came back and played with them years later. And after we've all developed as musicians over that period of time when we weren't together, I was curious, how was that experience for you, similar or different when you came back musically?
Of course it was different because everyone had evolved.
Sure.
personally and musically. So, you step back in the same stream, but everybody knows how to swim a little differently, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great. And Bela and I started writing stuff together, which we had never really done that much of earlier, because for whatever reason, it wasn't the right thing to do back then. And it felt very, very comfortable to do it for the Rocket Science album. And one of the things we wrote, which is called Life in 11, ended up winning the Best Musical Composition Grammy, which was a thrill, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I saw that you had won. I think the group had won one, and then you won for the composition, right? That's great.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember, but I won one earlier for a live version that I played on of The Sinister Minister in 1996, which we
Wow.
were nominated for that in 1990 when it came out, but not enough people knew who we were, so we didn't win. In the group of five, but didn't win.
Yeah, I
And it was,
imagine it was pretty hard. It was quite a challenge to figure out where to place a group like that in back then, especially.
the category. I mean, if you went into a record store, I hope some of your younger listeners know what a record store is. If you go into a record store, you'd find the Flecktones albums in like jazz, rock, bluegrass, country. It would be in all these different categories because no one knew where to put it. Folk, it's got a banjo player. It must be folk music, So we ended up being on the contemporary jazz charts for a while. We had the number one selling album. I think it was the Hippo album. I think was number one selling contemporary jazz. I mean, I'm happy that we were the number one selling album in something.
Yeah, genre labels are just so funny to me.
Yeah,
How they try to define things, and I think it winds up making things more confusing than it makes it feel more organized.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I'm assuming after the Flecktones, you went and did a stint with Kenny Loggins. Is that right?
Yes, yes, I did. I played with Kenny for 2 years and did the Outside from the Redwoods album and video, which was a wonderful experience. And touring with him was great. I recorded on a children's album he did called Return to Pooh Corner. And at the same time, I was also touring quite a bit in Europe with various different European artists, including the Lebanese oud player Rabi Abu Khalil. And I did 2 albums with him as well. And the great German bass clarinetist Michael Riesler, an incredible composer, unbelievable bass clarinet player, put together incredible bands. It was sort of like Frank Zappa and Ornette Coleman kind of combined together. All this music was very wildly adventurous. And I somehow or other, everything worked out timing wise. I never had to miss anybody's gigs. It was like magic. Fly over to Europe and then fly back and play with Kenny and, record on someone else's record somewhere. And it was an amazing few years, 93, 94, 95, when I was doing all that stuff.
Oh, that's
Even
so cool.
96.
I didn't realize until I was reading ahead of us having this conversation just how many different artists you had recorded with. You have played on a lot of albums.
Yes, I don't know how many, 300, 400. I really don't know. I don't keep track of it all. On my website, there's over 200, I believe, that are listed.
Wow, that's
Uh,
amazing.
and because the harmonica, and also piano, obviously, but the harmonica, gives you an entree. And I think of myself as a jazz musician, but I played a ton of folk music and rock and like bluegrass and to record with Donald Fagen and Styx, Dolly Parton, all these different people. And they were all great experiences. And especially performing live with some of them was playing with Donald and playing with Steely Dan. That was like
I was
wonderful.
going to ask you about that recording in particular because it's such a wonderful solo that you play on that song, and
Thanks.
the band they were always notorious in being in the studio, and I was curious what that experience was like for you, if it was you were kind of left to do your thing, or if there were some constraints on what to play on that tune. What was that like working with Donald in the studio?
It was great. I mean, he was a little nervous. It's like giving birth, putting out an album, and you're in charge of it. He was producing it. He wrote all the music, and he was a little little on edge. And at one point I said, I'm a little nervous. And he said, yeah, and we laughed, but it was great. I mean, he loved what I played, and I played really, really soulfully on it. And because he's a soulful guy, it's not like intellectual music. It is, but it's got blues at its heart. And it means something. Every song means something. He's really a genius, man. Harmonically, I put him up there with Thelonious Monk. Really, I mean, they're very similar in a way because they're both keyboard players and they don't like flash a lot of chops. But Donald plays some super interesting chord voicings, and then spreads it out through the band and expects people to make the perfect contributions, live and in the studio both. And so I had a ball playing live with him on stage the 3 or 4 times that I've gotten to do that.
Yeah, and what a touring band, right? I mean, wow.
Amazing. Some of the best stuff I've ever heard live was Steely Dan live. It was just unbelievable.
Unbelievable. I wanted to ask you about the, I think this album may have come out in the 90s. The album with Steve Smith and O'Teal, Jerry Goodman. How did that all happen? That's such a great album.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a thrill to record. Steve put that together. He was running the subsidiary of a label for this guy named Mike Varney, who had a label called Shrapnel, which had a lot of shredding guitar players on it. And this was the kind of the jazz fusion subdivision of Shrapnel Records called Tone Center. And Steve just called me up out of the blue and said, would you like to do this? The funny thing is that I had met O'Teal. I knew Jerry a little because he was from Chicago, but none of us had ever actually really played together. We had all met, and I played on some jingles with Jerry in the studios in Chicago, but we never played music together. So it was a very kind of open-ended thing. Like we each brought tunes, and we showed up at Steve's house when he used to live in the Bay Area. He had a studio in his house, very nice equipment. And we just picked tunes and started recording. And some of them were very, very difficult music. And we finished it in 9 days, and it was like quite a musical adventure. And it definitely made me grow as a musician to play on that album. It was fantastic.
I gave it another listen a few days ago. And those tunes and the recording, it still sounds as fresh today. I mean, it holds up. It sounds so good. And the playing is unbelievable.
It was an adventure. Sometimes, the piano was in the living room and the drums were in the basement. And, we started getting a feeling for each other's minds after a while. Sometimes we were in the same room recording, but sometimes I'd be in the living room. Jerry would be playing violin in the bathroom. And O'Teal and Steve would be in the basement. And, we're all connected by headphones.
Yeah.
And we would change up little things in the structures of the tunes. We would just sort of feel it. It was some wild stuff that on my tune, what's it called? I changed the name of it a few times. Suffering Catfish.
Yes.
Yeah. The form of that changed as we were playing it. And it just was great.
It's so good. Everyone is contributing so much to those tunes. It's a beautiful collective effort.
Thanks. Yeah, that was, I'm sorry we never got to play live, but Steve and Jerry and I did get to play live in this one band that we were in. And that was interrupted by 9/11.
Really?
We were in Blacksburg, Virginia, and the towers came down and the tour ended.
Oh, man.
It was with an Indian tabla player named Sandeep Burman and Randy Brecker. And guitarist Paul Bolenbeck was a killer guitar player who used to play with Joey DeFrancesco. And that was an amazing band. And it was starting to sound really good. And then it was like, the other band I was in from the mid-90s was Trio Globo.
Right.
Which, at the same time as I was playing with Kenny Loggins and Rabi Abu Khalil and Michael Riesler, Trio Globo started. And we recorded 2 albums for a label called Silverwave. And that was one of the best things I've ever done, those albums. It was just beautiful with Eugene Friesen on cello and Glenn Velez on percussion.
Oh, man.
And that was like an organic being, that band. Glenn used to play with Steve Reich. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes, I do.
Mallets player, and he did that for years. So Glenn is a rhythmic rhythmic guru, really. And everything he writes is fascinating, including the melodies. And Eugene, coming from the classical cello background, but always improvising, uh, he writes just beautiful, beautiful tunes. And the melodies are just some of my favorite melodies ever. And then I would contribute a few tunes as well. And so we would all work on the arrangements together and try to figure out how to make three guys sound really full without a bass player. The role of the bass was passed around between the low frame drums, the cello pits sounding like a bass, and the left hand of the piano. So it was, there's a lot of space. And as long as we left enough space, the three of us sounded very big. It was a fascinating experience to record and understand, that in a certain way, less is more when we played.
Did you get to tour that ensemble?
Oh yeah, we toured all over America. Up until fairly recently, we were touring, and then we did another album in 2010 called "Steering by the Stars" that I'm super proud of. That was done in Chicago, and I produced it. And it has, the usual Trio Globo original stuff, but also we recorded a version of Giant Steps that is really, I'm so proud that I got to play that with those guys. And it really is something I was working on for years, understanding the math behind that tune. And the version that we did, it starts out in a Middle Eastern rhythm called the Georgina, which is in 10/8 time. And I solo in 5/4 and then in 7/8. And then we finish in 9/8 with very abstract treatment of the changes as well. It's really something I'm extremely proud of.
I can't imagine the process of learning to play those different changes, also in the the different rhythmic structure of it.
Well, I'm really into different rhythms. I mean, that's one of the things that the Flecktones was appealing to me, because Bela was thinking rhythmically as well as was Vic and Roy. In the early '80s, early through mid '80s, I started a band called the Balkan Rhythm Band in Chicago to play Bulgarian and Macedonian music. And we played a lot, 7/8, 9/8, 5/8, 11/8, got really, really comfortable with all those meters. So when I joined the Flecktones, I was already very fluent in playing in odd time meters from doing all the Bulgarian stuff. And then afterwards, Trio Globo, But Glenn's stuff is challenging in a different way. I mean, he was into some South Indian things and other stuff that would just make turn your head inside out to try to keep track of where one was.
Before we end this, to talk about my brief experience getting to do a recording with you, thanks to my friend Stephen Fink. He had reached out to me about doing a song of his, and then told me that you were going to be recording harmonica on it. And I have to admit to you, Howard, I almost didn't want to do it anymore because I was too scared to sing and you hear it. And
that's great, though. I mean, so
that was a bucket list experience for me, getting to put something down with you on it. It was really fun. I appreciate the opportunity. we go, I wanted to ask you about your a couple things that I've seen that you have coming up. I know you've been touring with your group, the Howard
Yes,
Levy Four. Or is that
yes.
tour still happening, or are you
Well,
finished?
we have a bunch of small tours. We just played twice in the Chicago area last weekend, and then we have hopefully a 2-week tour coming up in May that will take us to the East Coast and the Southeast, including DC and New York and Philadelphia and hopefully Atlanta and Richmond, Virginia. Um, and it's a wonderful band. Chris Siebold, the guitarist, and I have played together for more than 20 years. He's a phenomenal guitarist. He can play anything on electric or acoustic, any time meter, like any style is unbelievable and virtuosic, like as virtuosic as it gets. And bass player Josh Ramos, he's a great upright player and a great electric player, which is unusual to find that. And just a sweetheart of a guy. And a drummer, Luis Everling, he's from Brazil, and he's also a great composer. So we do several of his tunes as well as mine and one of Chris's. The band is really an organic being. I just love playing with the guys. We all get along great. And it's just something that I'm very proud of. And it's been a long time since I've toured with a band under my own name, like really, really toured, instead of just like a one or two things here and there. So it feels really good to be doing that. And we have an album it's an EP of a live gig that was recorded in Chicago area with 4 tunes on it that we always play. 2 of mine, one of Luis's, three of mine, and one of Luis's tunes.
Oh, that's great.
It's called Live from Chicago, the Howard Levy Four.
Okay.
And the other stuff I'm doing, obviously the teaching.
Yes.
I've always taught. I like sharing knowledge. I mean, for free, but also for money. And oh God, how long has it been? Like 13 years, maybe. I've had this online harmonica school through a company called Artistworks, which is run by TrueFire now.
Yeah.
We're like the largest company doing that. It's the Howard Levy Harmonica School. I teach everything I know at every level. I have people learning how to play Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and people learning how to play Donna Lee. It's kind of crazy sometimes answering a few guys who are just starting, and then someone who's almost as advanced as I am. So it's exciting, and it's an international thing. And so there's really a community of harmonica players that have come together around the school. It's really, really cool. I never could have imagined that I'd be doing something like that. And the company just handles it so well. It's a great thing. And also I've been writing books, harmonica instructional books, coming at it from a totally different angle. Rhythms of the Breath. Have you checked that out at all?
I read a little bit about it. I'm so curious to hear what led you to write that.
Actually, I took my son to a drum lesson, and his teacher was teaching him rudiments, which are like the foundational sticking patterns that all drummers learn. Single stroke rolls, double stroke rolls, the 5-stroke, 6-stroke, all the doubles and the paradiddles, and then later the flam rudiments. And I realized that I could transfer the concept of right and left hand to blow and draw on the harmonica. And the bounce of the stick, this is the thing that sealed it for me. The bounce of the stick is the slide on one breath from one hole to another. So like a triple stroke roll, which is fairly hard on the drums because you have to get the rebound technique. On the harmonica, it's easy as pie. So that right hand, and left hand alternating. On the harmonica, you just blow, slide over 3 holes, and slide back in the opposite direction. And it's just so easy to do. It's the fewer times we change our breath direction on the harmonica, the easier it is to play. As opposed to drums, the single stroke stuff's easier than double stroke and triple stroke stuff. But the underlying principles apply. So if you're trying to play a paradiddle, for example, which I think that should be required skill set for every human on the planet,
I agree.
right, left, right. That's something that is so hard for so many people to do, and just to coordinate their hands. On the harmonica, it's blow, slide, draw, blow, draw, slide. If you do it in its simplest incarnation over 2 holes, just what the notes are on the instrument. And it sounds like a fiddle tune. I actually wrote a fiddle tune called Paradiddle Fiddle in the book because it's like the breathing pattern is blow, slide, draw, blow, draw, slide for the whole melody. And then it finishes up with some doubles. Ba, 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 like that. And these rhythmic breathing rudiments, I call them, they generate melodic patterns. And it's exactly the opposite of the way I normally think of the harmonica as a piano keyboard. I'm just letting the rhythm of my breath determine what notes come out. And so no one had ever written a book like this before. So it's like, okay, how am I going to do this? I mean, there's no precedent for it. So I just tried to make up the best and most concise exercises that I could. There's over 120 of them in volume 1. And evidently people really like it because it's sold really well. We did a Amazon Kindle print on demand thing, so it's sold all over the world with all the different Amazon outlets. And we just finished volume 2 because volume 1 went through all the paradiddles and volume 2 starts at the flams. And I wrote 150 exercises for the 11 flam rudiments. And in this book, I had a different system. As well as just being the notes that are on the harmonica, I organized it into 3 levels. And I had other exercises in volume 1 that did involve bending and overblowing, but not that much. But each exercise in volume 2 is played at 3 levels. So there's one level of just the notes are on the instrument. The other one includes bends. So if I were to play, for example, a paradiddle with bends, it would have all those tonalities instead of, and then the patterns are totally different if you start on draw. So I have a second set of exercises, even in the first book, where I start everything on draw, which for a drummer, it doesn't sound different if you're on a snare drum, for example, starting with the left hand or the right hand. But harmonica, if you start on draw, it's a totally different melodic pattern than if you start on blow. And anyway, the third level includes overblows and overdraws on all these rudiments, all these breathing rudiment exercises. So you can imagine this put my brain through some severe strains. I thought, like I told you about the smoke coming out of my ears, playing on a D flat harp and piano at the same time. This was that times 10. I'm sitting there no one's ever done anything like this before. I'm trying to keep these patterns faithful and move them up and down all 10 holes of the harmonica and back down again and not lose track of where I was in the rudiment. And it's sort of like having a giant set of tuned drums, like a Terry Bozzio set.
Mm-hmm. I was a percussion major, so I've certainly played my share of those rudiments and understand how getting the technique piece of it, I don't want to say out of the way, but making that not be your restriction to keep you from having melodic ideas. This is such a wonderful idea for a book. And I'm sitting here thinking, I think it might be time for me to start playing harmonica. I think this is the perfect way to do it.
There you are. You're a drummer, so like the stuff would be totally natural for you.
Yes.
It's and the multiple bounce roll. That's the funniest one because on drums it's hard, like turning that into a press roll or whatever it becomes. A harmonica, it's just right. And what I realized was I could limit it. Hey, let's do it over 9 holes. So that way you have to actually count the rhythm. So I did it in 3 triplets over the 9 holes. and then 8 holes is in 4/4, and then 7 holes is in 7/8, and so it develops all different kinds of skills on the harmonica, and not just going like this, you know. So that was the most surprising thing to me, was figuring that out, of how to be creative with the old multiple bounce roll. Which at first I looked at it, and I went, "What the hell am I going to do?" You know?
So
Yeah.
if someone wants to buy these books, what's the best place for them to do it? Go to Amazon, go to your, okay.
Go to Amazon and just look up Rhythms of the Breath, Volume 1. Volume 2 is not out yet. We just finished it like yesterday. Yeah.
Wow.
And we're going to get the author's copy sent to us and check it for, the way that the graphics look. And yeah, my wife is the one who does all the editing and layout and design. She's incredible. I mean, I could never have put this book out on my own. I mean, who's willing to work with a person on something like this? It's sort of like Nicholas Slonimsky's Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns. That was something that was so obscure, and until it came out that John Coltrane was practicing out of it, and then it started selling thousands of copies. And this is sort of the equivalent in the harmonica world. Is like something. It's a far out concept, but it really works. It really organizes your breathing and coordinate. You have to force to coordinate your breathing in a way that you would never normally do, and then it opens up your playing. As a result, it definitely, that's why I wrote the book, because it worked for me. It improved my playing. So I knew that it wasn't just an academic exercise. I was like taking a giant step into the unknown, putting something like this out into the world. Because,
Wow.
I've put out 17 albums under my own name, and it's always nerve-wracking, like, will they like it? Will they like me? And usually the answer is yes, but it's always a risk to put out anything on your own. Someone doesn't like it. We're all more sensitive about that than we care to admit.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
a negative review, it hurts. It really does. If someone says something negative about your music, and you just have to somehow or other get through it and not get too high with the highs and not get too low with the lows, and just keep going, because music itself is such an amazing thing. It sustains us, and you could just keep growing through it, through playing it and performing it for people. And the rapport between an artist and an audience is something that is just so wonderful. And I didn't really have that during COVID. I was doing a lot of online broadcasts and recording with people online, like the album that you're on, and it's gratifying. But there's nothing quite like performing for a live audience. And that's the most thrilling thing for me.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I understand, and I know that we're speaking on behalf of the musicians, but I know audiences felt the same way. I mean, there were a lot of people that was their that was everything to them, was getting to go and hear people play music live, and I'm glad that the world is back to some sort of normalcy in that respect.
Yes, very much so. Except that was a time. That's probably the only reason I was able to write my book, because I wasn't out there performing. So this is like, okay, here's a project, got to finish it. You know,
Yeah.
so I did, and I also recorded some self-contained albums that I never would have gotten to do. One of them is actually an album of my vocal tunes. I am not a great singer, but I put out a book in 2019, I think, called Songs, Poems, and Stories. And my wife said, "Oh, you have to put an audiobook version of this out." And then COVID hit. And I say, "Well, I can read the poems and I can read the stories, put some music in the background, but there's lyrics for 12 songs. You expect me to sing these 12 songs that I wrote?" It's like, she went, "Yes." It's like, okay. So I recorded tracks for each one, and it didn't come out too bad. It
Uh,
really didn't. I spent weeks on it, and it's out under its own name. I call it 12/45, and so you can see it in streaming platforms. And they're in all different styles, written over a span of 40 years. 12 songs written over 45 years. Back from the days that I was playing with Steve Goodman and John Prine all the way through like today, you know. Yeah.
Did you leave that experience of recording that feeling like it was a massive accomplishment having done that, or how did you feel about that experience?
It was a wonderful feeling. It opened me up, you know, because singing, I used to sing a lot in high school, but I you know, if you're not a singer, if you're a much better instrumentalist than you are a singer, it's not like you're a great singer. But I stopped singing because there was no call for it. Like, why would anyone want to hear me sing? And the songs that I wrote, I would have other people sing them sometimes, the jazzier ones. So this really opened me up in some interesting ways. It just connected me more with my inner musical self to actually sing these lyrics that I had written, sing them from the heart and try to sing in tune. A lot of my instrumental compositions were originally written with lyrics. But it's like, well, no one wants to hear me sing it. I'd much rather play it on harmonica. But that was the sort of the guide of some of these tunes. Was when they say someone has a lyrical style, it means that they sound like they're singing or playing words, you know. And so I guess I have a lyrical style on harmonica, and that's because I am thinking of words when I play.
Well, you certainly do have a lyrical style when you play. It's it's unlike anything I've ever gotten to experience. It's unbelievable to me to hear you play, Howard. Well, I want you to know before we end this today how much your music has meant to me for a long time, both as a composer, as a performer. I just thank you for the music and thank you for still shining your light for everyone. I feel like you're still wanting to learn and you're still wanting to pass on your knowledge to everyone, and for everyone, I just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, man, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, Howard, thanks for your time today, and best of luck. Everyone go and check out Howard's book, listen to his music, go out and hear them. I have a lot of folks that listen in Atlanta. Go out and check out his band, and just keep supporting what he's doing, because it's remarkable stuff. So thanks, Howard. Have a good one, man.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm your host, Brad Williams. The show's theme is called Placation and was written by Mark Mundy. Drop me a line at the email address, thebandwichtapes@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to receive new episodes of the podcast. And while you're at it, please tell someone else about the show. Thanks for listening.